So recently, Google has been putting itself on the front page with the ongoing feud with China. It claims that Gmail, which is Google's email service, was hacked into in a sophisticated and systematic fashion by people inside China. The suspicion is that the attacks were done by the government personnel. Google also says that it's sick and tired of the government-imposed search results filter, which it has been complying with since it entered China in 2006. So Google is pretty unhappy with the general lack of freedom of information enforced by the Chinese government. And for those reasons, Google is now considering pulling out of China. That's right, Google is considering ending its service in the Chinese market. So big news indeed, big news. And I'm burning to say something about it. Let's first take a look at Google's performance in China. According to the latest numbers, Google has a market share of 30% in the Chinese market. That's the search engine market. It's nowhere close to the market share it has in the United States or elsewhere in the world for that matter. It's still pretty good considering it was originally English-based and has to get over the language barrier. But one of Google's competitors in China, Baidu, who is practically unheard of outside of China, has a market share of 70%. Now that's well over twice what Google has. So I had to break the news to you, but Google has really not been doing all that well in China compared to its domestic business. And also in 2006, when Google entered China, they were asked to follow censorship regulations by China from the very beginning. And they looked quite obedient, or should I say, submissive at the time. I recall at the time there was a congressional hearing in which Google was heavily criticized by US lawmakers for bending the ideal of information freedom. And guess what Google responded at that hearing? So this is what Google said. To do business in a country, we, just like everyone else in that country, have to abide by the relevant laws and regulations of that country. So apparently, back then, Google had absolutely no problem with censorship. Or maybe they were just too optimistic with how the Chinese market would turn out for them. And now a few years later, it hasn't quite worked out the way they wanted business-wise, and they all of a sudden became very upset with the government. So several questions I have. First thing I want to ask here is, would Google still do this, threaten to pull out of China, if it were making huge profits in China, and if China were indeed an indispensable market to its business? Now think about it. Out of the billions and billions of dollars of revenue Google gets every year, only less than 2% of it comes from China. Kudos to Google, of course, because obviously without China, unlike many other companies, without China, Google still kicks ass. But I just wonder, just saying, would Google still be willing to give up its Chinese market if, say, 50 or 70% of its revenue actually comes from China? The answer could very well be yes. Google is just really keen on holding up to their values of freedom of speech and so on, and do not care for profits by resorting to censorship and being hacked on. But guess what? The free world, including the United States of America, also do fishy things for reasons like national security, or so they claim. They were busted for monitoring personal phone calls a few years back. And recently, on a related news on CNN, it was reported that the US government's intelligence can also gain access to people's personal emails, and that includes Gmail. So I think that Bill Gates, that retired Microsoft guy, I think he nailed it on this one. This is what he said on the Google thing. If Google ever chooses to pull out of the United States, then I'd give them credit. That's right. If Google were to be consistent with its high values and standards, probably should consider pulling out of the US too. That I truly doubt they ever will do. Why is that? Easy. What do we know about Google? Google is cool, high-tech, hip, and all that, but it's still a company, a publicly traded company. And a company, by definition, has the main goal of profit maximization. A public company has the responsibility to maximize its shareholders' dividend. That's what a company does, first and foremost, and above anything else. Now, Bill Gates went on to say that Google got a lot of credit for doing nothing. So true. Now, this PR boost, the gain of corporate reputation, or these intangible assets, whatever you want to call it, these for Google probably outweighs its loss of the Chinese market in the long run. Now, I have to agree with Bill Gates on this one, although he probably said this from the perspective of one of Google's competitors. But it's right. Google is doing nothing but being a corporation and doing what a corporation does, which again is seeking profits above anything else. That was my first point, but like I said, that could just be pure speculation. It's absolutely possible Google is not considering profitability in this whole thing, but simply holding itself to high values and fiercely protecting the freedom of speech. But I have something else, which hopefully some of you did not know before, so that I'm spreading knowledge to those who did not possess it before. This is actually related to a historic but tragic event in recent Chinese history. On March 14th, 2008, a severe riot broke out in Lhasa, Tibet, where innocent civilians were killed and public and private properties were destroyed in organized attacks. About 2 days later, an amateur video appeared on YouTube. I want to notice that YouTube has been fully owned by Google since 2006. So an amateur video appeared on YouTube about 2 days later under the title "Tibet was, is, and always will be part of China." Now, I don't want to get into the specifics or the content of that video, because the issue of Tibet is a whole big topic in itself. In fact, a much bigger one than this Google thing. And that's probably another topic for another day. What I want to talk about is what happened to that video that was posted on YouTube. That video went viral in no time and generated thousands and thousands of comments and millions of view counts. The comments were, not surprisingly, very divided. Some objecting to the idea that Tibet is part of China, and some supporting it, most of which are native-born Chinese, naturally. So it was a hugely popular video that generated a lot of heated comments and debate.